the two kind of pillars of the two big ideas that you'll see repeated over and over are what we call continuous improvement and respect for people. So continuous improvement is basically you want to try to get a little bit better every day. That's it. Respect for people is the idea that you want to fully engage your employees in getting better every day, but do it in an atmosphere of respect and trust. And you know, these two pillars, these two big ideas are have proven to be very, very powerful, very, very relevant to today's world. You'll see that they are reflected in all these different ways of managing. So we'll get into that tonight. You'll see how that actually works in practice. Some of the benefits, and this applies to any one of those four practices. Each of those practices, by the way, was one of the webinars. So we've already covered the Organize a Workplace in February. Solving problems was in December. Tonight we're doing Managing Everyday Work. But each of those, even though they're all connected, each stands alone. So for example, tonight you'll see how managing your everyday work in this lean way is going to reduce your costs, producing better financial performance because you get everybody on the same page doing the best currently known way of doing things. It's going to help you to create more loyal customers. And you'll see why, because when you look at customer needs, not in general, but from the standpoint of the specific everyday work and the idea of a process, you come up with unique understandings that you just would not get any other way. And I'll give you some examples of that. It's really amazing what happens there. You also have greater capacity for change because you are engaging your employees, you're teaching them, they're becoming more educated, they're more a part of the business, so they're more trusting, more willing to change, and more prepared because they're more understanding of what's going on. And lastly, even doing all of this, you still also are creating this in a less stressful and more fulfilling work environment, which seems impossible, but it's absolutely happened over and over again. As I say, City Furniture is one of the great examples of it, so you'll really hear that from the horse's mouth in April, the final session. But of course, this idea of having a great place to work, very relevant now because we're talking about retaining the good people we have and becoming more successful at recruiting people. And I'm sure many people on this call are having to deal with that situation if you're in business today. Okay, so this is something I hear pretty often from business owners and some managers. They'll say, around here, one hand doesn't seem to know what the other hand is doing. Okay, why can't we all be on the same page? And we ran into this where I used lean extensively was in my own business, which is a wholesale distributor of cabinet furniture hardware. And what happened was we would stock about 5,000 different items that we would sell to cabinet makers, furniture makers, hinges, drawer slides, knobs, pulls, a lot of little items. About 5,000 were stocked in our warehouse. And customers would call in, and by 4 o'clock, they could call in, all the orders would be picked for them, loaded in our trucks, and sent out the next day. So we had a number of order pullers who would go around pulling all the different items, packaging them, marking them, and then placing them for the truck drivers to load that night and take to the next day. Well, when we first got started with all this, we really didn't have a good handle on specifying how you should do things. So order pullers everyone kind of had their own way of doing it, their own way of marking the box, their own way of where they would put it. Drivers had their own way of loading and so forth. And we really had a lot of trouble with that. You'd have shipments going on the wrong truck route, shipments going to the wrong customer, sometimes not the right items in the bag. So, and what we were experiencing is what you see if you don't have everybody on the same page, where when workers don't think about how they do the work, if you're really focused on just getting the work done and you don't step back and think about how you're doing it, you get a lot of variation. Everybody may do it a different way. And there's a lot of uncertainty. So you get spotty performance. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. You almost always get poor coordination because one group of people don't really know how the other group is doing it. So how can you coordinate if you don't understand that? So the answer to it, why can't we be? Yeah, we can if you standardize your work. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And so in our case, that meant, and it took some time, laying out what was the best way of pulling the items. How do you do it? Specifying it in a certain way. What was the best way of loading trucks and preparing to deliver the next day? So once all the order pullers knew what they were doing, the drivers knew what they were doing, but just as important, they knew what each other was doing. So drivers understood what order pullers were doing and vice versa. And you'll see tonight, so lean standard work is about specifying this current best way of doing things to help employees learn and improve their own work, but also to appreciate and coordinate with the work of others. So you'll see that as we go through tonight. So learning objectives for tonight, basically three areas we'll cover. We'll start out talking about standard work, try to recognize what the purpose of standard work is, and the value of checklists. And I'm sure most or everybody uses checklists, and that's a great place to start for standard work. But there's even better ways that we'll get into. Secondly, then, part of standardizing work is not just to create some kind of document or checklist, but to make sure everybody's on board with it. And that's where stand-up meetings come in. And both standard work and stand-up meetings, these are some of the most iconic lean management techniques. So what we're doing here is just showing you how these techniques fit into these regular management activities. So these are the two techniques that help you to manage this everyday work. Then after that, we'll get into this idea of process and how to break down a process. And it's a little bit involved, but not too bad. But it's really valuable because it really helps you to create a standard work guide that does really a lot more than just kind of a randomly created checklist. So we'll go through all that tonight. And as I go through, I'm going to point out what I call gems. So these are sort of things that I've learned over years and years and years of doing this in many different situations, that if you get nothing else out of tonight, I'd want you to take away these gems because they really are simple but very, very powerful ideas. So I'll cover those as we go through. So let's get started with standard work. So standard work is designed, the idea is to help stabilize the work activities, avoid all this variation by capturing the current best way of performing the work. And you notice I'm not saying best practice. And this is one of the areas where lean management really is different than how many companies are managed, because a lot of managers and owners, we want the best practice. Let's try to really understand the best practice, and we're going to nail that down, make sure everybody's doing it. But in reality, best practice is a myth. Things are constantly changing. Even if you get to what is maybe a best practice, it's going to be different next week or as new people come in and so forth. So as things change. So standard work first stabilizes the work, capturing the current best way of doing the work. But then it has a couple of purposes. One, it's a fixed control. So now we're stabilizing, making sure everybody's doing that current best way of performing the work. And that would be whether you've been an experienced person doing this for many years, or you're a new person coming aboard just being trained. The other thing though, while it's a fixed control, standard work is also flexible. So it's kind of a baseline or a challenge for anyone who can suggest an improvement to create a new and better current best way. Okay, so that dual nature is very important, and it needs to be built into the way that you create the standard work and communicate it to your workers. As I said before, standard work is not just about showing the people that do the work how to do it. It's also for everybody so that all employees can understand what each other does. So there's a mutual appreciation and coordination factor to all of this. So standard work is often shown as kind of this hill, kind of walking up the improvement hill. And so this here would be your standard work guide. So it's actually usually a document or a control device put on the wall. It could be a piece of paper, it could be a whiteboard. We'll go into some examples. But when you first document it, and I'll be showing you how to do this tonight. You first document the standard work guide, and that's to stabilize your work. You can't slide down anymore. That's the idea of controlling, being a fixed control. But then all you can do is roll up the improvement hill here. And as you come up with better ways, now you revise the standard work guide, see, revision number. And that represents an update. And now you block that. So you're locking in this even better way. So that's kind of that dual nature of it. It's meant to keep you from rolling down and regressing, but it also lets you to work your way up the improvement ladder. And I do want to mention this is about everyday work, which is these are the things that you do, every day or every week, kind of regular activities, paying bills, serving customers, and whatever. This does not include what you might call project work, which is more like one time. Like if you're developing a new computer system and installing it, that's going to happen one time pretty much. It might happen again many years from now, but it's not everyday work. So what we're talking about here is managing this everyday work. And as you're going to see, and this is kind of the first of these gems, when you do these standard work guides, less is more. And you're going to see less is more. You want to keep this as simple as you can without losing the essence of what is involved. If you keep it simple, it has a lot of advantages. People are a lot more likely to use it. Okay, so a standard work guide is not like a procedures manual, because how often do you have this big, thick, detailed procedures manual that nobody reads, right? It often sits in a desk drawer. So that's not what we're talking about. You need to be simple, easy to use, accessible to everyone. And when something is simple like this, it's not only accessible to everyone so that, again, all employees can understand it, but it's also easier to update too. And I'll show you an example of that. All right, so, checklists are kind of the standard form for a standard work guide. I mean, that's, it's sort of like, how do you do things? You make a checklist, and there's all different forms for it. Sometimes you got months across the top, days, quarters, could be a piece of paper, it could be a screen. Sometimes it's on Excel, which, is fine. It's better than not having it, but as soon as you put anything in Excel or into a computer system, it's suddenly only accessible to people that have a computer, which is not everybody. And it's only accessible if you happen to be looking at that screen. So much better way of handling that is to post things on the walls. Walls are very valuable. This part of what we call visual controls that I covered in the last webinar, which was in February, this idea of posting visual controls that help everybody to understand not just how to do things, but the status of work, where things stand, and so forth. So, but anyway, these are different examples. Sometimes there's pictures. These can be on whiteboards. They can be questionnaires, for example. A lot of professional service firms have to gather information from clients, and this could be kind of a checklist for that. You can have videos. So there's all different formats, but as I said, I'm going to show you towards the end of the webinar how to do this in a very effective way and give you some guidelines for how to put together a really effective standard work guide. Now, here's one I came across, a checklist, and I thought it was pretty good. This is a checklist from the World Health Organization, trying to give guidelines really for the world on what are the things to be sure of when you're doing a surgery. And it's broken into, signing in before anesthesia, before the skin incision, and then after patient leaves the operating room. So without going into the details, what I like about this is it's relatively simple. You see each one has maybe 5, 7 different kind of steps and some check boxes. But it's really intended not to be, for example, a detailed procedures manual for whoever's going to make the skin incision, whoever's going to do the surgery. It's at a high level so that, for example, the people that are doing the sign-in at least have some idea of what is going on here. People, as they handle leaving the operating room, the nurses and healthcare professionals know what's happening here. So that it is a pretty good idea, pretty good example of how a checklist can support coordination. And as I said, I'm going to give you more examples of that later on in the webinar. So that's the idea of standard work. But as I said, it's not just a matter of creating a document that says, here's how we do things. It's getting everybody on board with that. And that's where stand-up meetings come in, okay? So a stand-up meeting, it's a brief gathering of a team, a department, some other group of related employees, hopefully daily, but no less frequently than weekly. Short meeting, often 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It's held regularly at the place of work. So wherever the work is being done, that's where you want to go. And I'll show you examples of this. And it's done to support standard work. So you're supporting training. So new people can learn during these sessions about standard work, reinforcing it for those that already have been doing it for many years and maybe you're straying from it, and improvement. So coming up with ideas for improving the standard work. Now, these meetings also provide other kinds of opportunities for team building. And remember, fully engaging your employees is one of the two pillars of lean management. So as opposed to just telling employees what to do and expecting them to go do it, you engage them, you look for their ideas, you look for their input. And that's in a stand-up meeting gives you a lot of opportunities to do those sorts of things. Now, this idea of these daily interactions is the second gem I wanted to refer to, because this is just so powerful. And I've seen it over and over and over again, that just getting people together and interacting daily, even if it's for a few minutes. And it can be, you know, we have a lot of remote work going on now. And so it can be, you know, on a Zoom session and so forth. But getting that interaction where everybody's together is just so powerful. It's almost like a heartbeat, you know, is what I've observed. The companies that do this, it's like a heartbeat. And it gives you a chance for little problems can be captured quickly. You find out, you know, people aren't stewing about things. They can kind of talk about things. And also getting all people together in one room, even for a short period, has been proven to be really the best way of generating ideas. In fact, in engineering, we've got something called concurrent engineering, where we've realized that, you know, you really want to get people in the same room when you're trying to develop new ideas, rather than, you know, having them in different offices and kind of trading emails and phone calls and so forth.
David, can I interrupt? We have a question almost about what you're related to now.
Sure.
Okay, someone's asking us, you actually, since so many companies are now virtual, what suggestions do you have for virtual communication for office administration workers?
Yeah, well, I mean, what we're doing now is, I've seen it handled very effectively on Zoom is one way to do it if you're going to have stand-up meetings. And of course, the other very popular way of having these kind of online meetings and communications would be some of your virtual collaboration platforms like Microsoft Teams. What's the other one? I'm just forgetting. It's very, I can't think of it. I covered it in the last session, but where you actually have the software to support you know, these kind of joint sessions where you can even then, you know, share documents and so forth. I know SharePoint is used to some extent like that. So there's definitely ways of doing it. It's you always lose a little bit by not having that physical interaction, but sometimes you even gain, because, you know, the idea of these, at least these stand-up meetings, is to be respectful of everybody's time and get it, you know, be focused on an agenda. And sometimes that works even better online. So does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you, David.
Oh, okay. All right, so let me give you an example. I'm going to go ahead and show you. This is about a 4-minute video, and this is how a company called FastCap does their daily stand-up meeting, and they call it their morning meeting. And this guy here is Paul Akers, and he and I kind of grew up in the business together. He was one of our good suppliers when I was in business as a hardware distributor. And he's a real lean fanatic. He's used lean incredibly well with his own company. He's written many books on it. His main book is called 2 Second Lean, which I would encourage you to get. It's even though it relates more specifically to manufacturing, he does cover a lot of examples, and he's he looks at lean and not kind of this engineering large corporation style that you often see, but really in a very practical, how do you do this in a small business, which is exactly what I'm trying to do too, is, bring that to you, because obviously that's what we're trying to do, is help small businesses to understand this and really make great use of it. So let me go ahead and show this to you. You'll see he's going to talk about standard work in these meetings, and they cover a lot of other things. As I say, it goes beyond just standard work. It's engaging your employees. I'm not saying you have to do it this way. He's got his way. You'll see, he kind of, sometimes he goes overboard, but maybe not. So I'm going to go ahead and play it. And Lewis, let's make sure the sound is coming through. Sometimes it doesn't, but let me play it and then we'll come back. You hearing it?
How are you today?
Welcome to FastCap. When people ask me what's different about FastCap, I say the morning meeting. What's the morning meeting? It's a time where we invest in our people and create a culture of continuous improvement. In that morning meeting, we have a new leader every day.
Good morning,
Good morning. Because FastCap is all about growing people. And we want each one of our people to become leaders. So we allow them to lead the morning meeting every morning, which induces and creates the culture that we want. So in the morning, we meet together in what we call our sandbox. It's a circle. It's kind of a square that we have marked out, and everybody stands within that square, respecting the time that we have together. And that's where we convey all the important things about FastCap to our people on a daily basis. Things such as how much product did we sell the day before and how much did we ship?
Okay, so sales for yesterday were 29,633. Team B did 16,000. Team A did 13,000.
We review the mistakes we made.
Only one mistake. Forgot to back order pocket chisels.
We review the improvements we made. We actually stand around where people have made significant contributions to saving time and money, and we look at those things and we evaluate and we celebrate it, because we believe we teach it, we measure it, and then we celebrate it. We call it TMC, and we do that over and over and over again. We also review safety board issues.
And nobody's supposed to be within 5 feet of the forklift while it's operating.
We also discuss the topics that we learned from the historical figures that we studied in the past, because yes, we even study history.
Winston Churchill said these words.
Because we believe that inputting the people and growing people is the most powerful thing we can do. If we have people that are engaged in world affairs, that understand historical principles, those people can make good and sound decisions on a daily basis, and they make a much greater contribution to the output of our company as a result of that. So we input into people. We believe the number one goal at FastCap is to grow people. Just some of the principles that we study at FastCap are, the purpose of FastCap is to grow people. Toyota is always looking for ways to make things faster. Our job title is, because our goal is to improve the process every day. All we ask from all of our people is to make a 2-second improvement every day. Everything of value comes after much hard work. These are some of the 16 principles that FastCap believes in, and we teach it on a daily basis. Whether we're studying our videos online that show us how our products work so our people are up to speed on the details and nuances of our own product, or whether or not we're looking at historical figures such as Thomas Jefferson or George Washington. We're always learning, in a constant mode of learning, and that's what the morning meeting creates. A place where we can learn and grow as a team. We understand the values, the objectives, the goals, and we go to meet those on a daily basis. And the morning meeting is the way that happens. People say to me, how could you spend that much time and money in a morning meeting with all those people staying around from 15 minutes to an hour? And my response is, how can I afford not to? Because I have the most engaged, self-managed, self-disciplined people that believe in what FastCap is trying to achieve, believe in serving the customer, believe in only giving value-added activity. This is what FastCap is all about. And we do that in the morning meeting, and that's why FastCap is successful. And that's how other companies can also gain this powerful culture of transformation, which FastCap nurtures every day. That's the FastCap way. Welcome to the morning meeting.
No, that's enough. Okay. Can never turn off Paul. He keeps going. So that's it. It's, as I say, obviously doesn't mean you have to do history lessons, but you know, the real message that comes across is this attitude of helping the employees learn. And you know, when you're doing that, that's a show of respect, and you build trust through that. You're showing that you respect them enough that you're willing to spend that time. You respect their ability to come up with ideas, and that's a real fundamental part of this that we'll cover in more specific detail in the last webinar coming up in April with City Furniture. Okay, so now we'll cover the last part of the webinar, which is this idea of process. And here we're going to look at process, and specifically doing a process breakdown as a way of creating a really good standard work guide. But I do want to step back and tell you that kind of the third gem that I've learned over many, many years is this whole idea of process is amazingly powerful. As you're going to see, it's a way of thinking about work. But what makes it so powerful, a couple things. One is it shows you how to step back and think about what you're doing. You know, because again, many times we're all, the managers, employees, everybody's kind of focused on getting the job done, and whatever it takes, we'll get it done. And you're tired and you go home and that's it. And you don't often spend too much time stepping back and thinking about how you're doing the work. Are there better ways? So this idea of process gives you a framework for thinking about that. And what I found is when you use it, it's like an X-ray, okay? Because, you know, you will then see things that you would not otherwise see. Because if you go around and you look at what's happening in your work, there's no obvious process. You have to think about it in a certain way. And once you start thinking about that way, you see, for example, as I said earlier, you'll see aspects of what your customers need that you never realized. I'll show you that. I can guarantee you, if you apply this, you will learn more about what your customers are looking for than you know now. It's very, very helpful. In our first webinar in December, we talked about how to solve problems by finding and eliminating waste. And once you start applying the idea of process to that, you come up with many more ways of seeing the waste and improving the waste that we don't have the time to cover in the scope of these webinars. But so this is kind of the link to doing a lot of other things that you can get into process mapping and process analysis. But for now, just understanding the idea of process, it's not that complicated, but it's very powerful. So let's go into it. So as I said, it's basically a way of thinking about work, and a process is any work activity that has a beginning and an end. It accomplishes a particular purpose, and it's repeated regularly. So that's kind of the main pieces. That's what a process is. The end result of it, when it reaches its end, is an output. And the user of that output is the process customer, okay? So let's say we're looking at the work activity of creating the payroll for a company, right? So it has a beginning. You start at a certain time every week or every couple of weeks. You go through, there's an end to it when all the checks or the direct deposits go out. So the output of that process, and it's repeated regularly, right? And the output are checks, money going into the accounts of the employees. And so who's the user of that output? It's the employee. The employee is the process customer. So that's the basic idea. If you start thinking about working that way, and I'll show you some examples. Now, what we're going to look at tonight is how to break down a process, which means that you identify the specific kind of tasks, or we'll call them steps, that you have to go through to produce that output, whatever it is. And then for each step, you look at what's referred to as key points. So that would be things that might make or break the step, things that could go wrong. What would make the step easier? And also what might injure the worker, which is relevant, especially if there's any physical work involved, but even with computer work, possible injury from carpal tunnel, and there's various ways workers could be injured. So that's what process breakdown means. So here's an example just to kind of show you how you might define a process. So here's a purchasing process. Everybody should be familiar with that, right? So it has a beginning. It starts whenever somebody decides to order some supplies. It ends when the supplies are received and put on the shelf. And so that's the output. Supplies are available on the shelf. They weren't there before. Who are the customers? Process customers, whoever uses those supplies, right? So it could be various kinds of people. And you can break it out into steps. So here's what would be one way of looking at it. It's not the only way, but here I've got it in 5 steps. Step 1 is you request supplies, whoever is asking for the supplies. Somebody prepares and submit the purchase order. Somebody accepts the shipment coming in from the supplier. So between here and here is where the supplier actually has to produce or pull the items. Then typically somebody has to check those received supplies to make sure you got what they say you got so you can pay your bill properly. And then you put the supplies on the shelf. So I've got it broken into 5 steps. And remember, simple is better, right? Less is more. So could this have been done in 10 steps? Of course. Now you could take this prepare and submit and say, okay, fill this out, send it by fax, checking received supplies might have 10 steps attached to it. So there can be a lot of detail here, and that's what tends to happen as you start filling in all the details. But you really, for purposes of the standard work guide, remember, you want to keep it as simple as you can without losing the essence of it. And I would argue that these are 5 is about as simple as you can get. If you left any one of these out, I think you're missing a key part of this process. The other aspect I want to mention is the process actors. Okay, so these are the people who perform the steps. So whoever requests the supplies, the people that place the order, the people that accept shipments, and so forth. Okay, and you'll see why that's relevant in just a minute here. Okay, so here's how you actually break down a process. And I've actually got a form. So this step-by-step chart and this form were both sent to you. They should have been sent to you ahead of time. The process breakdown sheet, you've got a PDF for it. And you also have a Word document that's fillable if you want to do it on a computer, or you can just handwrite it. There's nothing wrong with handwriting either as you go through this activity. So how do you break down a process? You first have to decide on what is the target process. You kind of scope it out. So this involves giving it a name. What is it? Who are the process customers? What's the starting step? And what's the output? And so that's what we have across the top here, right? Process name, customers, starting step, and outputs. And I do have a revision number or date because, as I said before, as we make this into a standard work guide, you always want to be able to revise and update it. So you want to build that kind of into your activity at this point. Then you assemble any relevant materials, pull together forms, hopefully filled out forms, any checklists if they're there. Go out and talk with the process actors, the people who carry out the work activities, and kind of get a feel for it. Just kind of walk through it in your mind. You know, sequentially, what are the things we do here? And then you make a first attempt to describe the process and go ahead and just fill in, and I say anywhere from 5 to 15 steps on that process breakdown sheet, okay? Just start filling it in. And one of the things you should understand as you do this is you're always going to have the chance to make this better and better. So you don't want to spend a lot of time really studying it, spending days and days, just put it down, because you're going to have a chance to keep making this better and better. So I always say one of the philosophies of any of these lean techniques is just do it. Don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Don't get into analysis paralysis. Just do it, because you'll be able to constantly improve it. So you make that first attempt, then you take that worksheet and go back to the process actors and say, hey, okay, this is what I think. Is this what it is? And most of the time they'll say, no, you're missing this. So you adjust the steps, and here's where you fill in those key points. And again, just whatever you can gather. Every step doesn't have to even have a key point. Just get started with it. What's amazing is you'll find that when you do this and you go back to the process actors, you're probably going to get disagreement. Some people, like when we do this with the order pullers, one would say, oh yeah, I always mark this on the bag this way. And the other guy says, no, that's not how you do it. You do it, so it actually brings out some of these variations that you want to nail down. And so you take your best shot at, well, what do I think the best one is at this point? And you adjust the steps, you document it. And then lastly, you convert it into the process breakdown sheet into a standard work guide and post it as a visual control. Okay, so I'm going to go through an example of this in just a second here. I did just want to show you a couple of examples of processes. So you have to think about, well, which process am I going to grab? So I mentioned some of these, like processing weekly payroll, the employee is the customer. But realize some processes, and we talked about this in a prior webinar, some of these are internal, meaning the process customer is not the customer of the company. It might be an employee, it might be a vendor. Like I said, processing weekly payroll, the employee is the main process customer. But the same breakdown method, the same way of thinking about work applies, whether it's an inside internal kind of process or an external kind of process. So an external process is same type of thing. There's a beginning, end, there's steps, there's an output, but the process customer is actually your customer. So for example, if you're looking at the way you serve a patron in your restaurant, the steps you go through, the main process customer is the restaurant patron. The example I'm going to show you is this idea of handling a support ticket, and I'll explain what that is. An MSP, a managed service provider. The client is the customer there. But for example, even presenting this webinar is those of you that have registered, you are the process customers. And believe me, I think very carefully about your needs, because that's why I'm doing this. I'm doing this to try to satisfy your need for information and something you can hopefully walk out tomorrow with and apply first thing in the morning. So that's what I always shoot for. Okay, so let's go through the example, and we're getting towards the end here. So this example of breaking down a process, as I said, MSP is a managed service provider, and these are companies that act as the IT department for small or sometimes mid-sized businesses. So some of you may actually use MSPs. And so for example, if there's a problem, if one of your employees or you have trouble with your computer, it's not, what happened to this data, this thing is blowing up. The way it works is you submit a support ticket. So you either call or you email in and say, hey, I need help. There's a system for doing it. So this process here is how does the MSP handle those support tickets that come in? So the customers, of course, are the clients you're trying to fix the problems for them. But in looking at this, we realize, the customers, there are also internal customers, because every time you fix a ticket for a client, you want to document it, because this problem may come up again, and you want to make sure that the next technician who handles it, like at this company had multiple technicians, already knows about it, has the background, so that they're actually the techs who would use the document in the future, the record of what happened, were also customers. So the starting step was whenever the customer contacted you. There were various ways for that to happen. The output was, hey, we satisfied their request. We fixed whatever it was that needed fixed or whatever they had requested. And so that's for the MSP client. And the documents need to be completed so they're ready for whoever needs to use it internally. So, and this was, we actually went through this exercise, went through, defining the scoping it out like I've put here, went out, gathered information. A lot of the current information was online, this being a computer consulting kind of company. Talked to the techs who do this, the technicians, talked to the operations manager, and talked to clients. Because, realize any kind of service process, what defines service is actually the client or the customer is an actor. If you think about it, like in this case, the client is giving you information. If they don't give you the full information, it's going to mess up this process. And then later on, the client has to confirm, yeah, you did it, or no, you didn't. It didn't work. And that's true of anything, any kind of service process. So, so in putting this together, we went and interviewed the different people involved, interviewed clients. And one of the things we learned was that a client would send in a support ticket request, and the tech would grab it and start working on it. And all right, and they would normally get back within an hour, sometimes two, sometimes less. But the clients, once we went and talked with them and said, hey, how is this process going? Here are the steps. What do you think? And when we got to this step, opening a ticket, a number of clients said, hey, I wish you would just acknowledge that you got it. It hardly ever happens, but I'm always worried, I sent you an email, I don't hear back. I don't know if you're doing something or not. And it was like, ding, So, oh, absolutely. So there's an example of where we never realized that those clients, that was one of their needs with relation to this process. See, if we didn't ask them about this process, they're probably not even going to say that. If we said, what do you want out of us generally, they'd say, oh, good service and da 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 da. But once you get down to the process level and you start talking to your customers, I guarantee you're going to learn things. And I've seen this over and over and over again. I've now supervised close to 200 different projects like this, and I've seen it over and over and over again. So, so anyway, so the first cut going through actually was about, I think we had about 15, 20 steps. And we got it down to 6, again, because you want to keep it simple without getting rid of the important aspects of it. And how do you do that? Well, a couple of things that I want to point out here to be aware of. One is you see step 3, when the ticket comes in, the ops manager has to make a decision on whether to escalate it or not. And that means, is this something that a level 1 tech can handle, or do you have to bring in the big dogs that really know how to do tricky stuff? And so this would be kind of a branch, right? It's kind of if it's a really tough problem, we have to do other steps. So when you do this, you just say, all right, if yes, then other steps apply. Don't try to get everything in there. Don't go down every branch. Take the most common branch. So that's one way of keeping this from having, 20, 30 steps. The other way is what I call black boxing. And you'll see here in step 4, assign and work the ticket. And it says use ticket support system. Okay. There's probably 30 steps inside there, but we black box them. We just say, fix the ticket, work it, fix the issue. That's all. Now, if you want to see then the detail, you can always explode it out. The ticket support system can have, specifics on, maybe there's 5 different kinds of problems that all have their own set of steps. But at this point, you want to keep it as simple as you can. So those are a couple of ways that you can do that. You can put in some goals. You put in the goals for how long it took. And then this last step, even once you've fixed the problem and confirm with the client, document the ticket. This wasn't going well. Many techs would just, oh, I fixed the problem. I'll get to the documentation later, and they never did. So goal was to document all tickets by the end of the day. We even came up with some ways of having even a handwritten notepad to make sure you did it and so forth. So that's an example of how you'd go through it. Now, convert this to something that you want to post as your actual standard work guide, and here's what it looked like. Okay, so here's your 6 steps. You can see it's simple. It's got some additional information, the goals, you know, within 10 minutes from client support request. And you realize, you know, each of these are filling in some of these key points, right? Like, what could make or break the process? Well, you know, follow these rules. If you don't follow these rules, you may not do a proper escalation. You may be escalating a bunch of things that don't need to be escalated, or vice versa. How about make the work easier? Well, you use some of these, use a template, use this support ticket acknowledgement email, okay? So again, all these are coming out as you talk through this. And here's where you're getting the coordination aspect. So you've got different players involved, and oftentimes it's when one player or group interacts with another where the problems arise. So this kind of brings all of those issues out. So this is putting it, this would be the document that was actually posted. It was originally posted on the wall, could be on a whiteboard, whatever. And that's the way to, you know, create a better standard work guide. It's still a checklist form, but it's really powerful because it's not only simple, it helps for coordination, that everybody can understand this. And it's very updatable too. If you want to improve something, maybe in the way you escalate, you don't have to change this. You just go in and change these rules. So it makes it easier to update and so forth. So that's it. I do want to mention too, I haven't talked about it, but you know, all of the standard work I'm showing you here is in the context of you know, group activities and processes, but standard work applies just as well, very well, to personal work, things that you only do yourself. And I've done this, you know, for a number of years now. I just went through, you know, preparing my taxes. And it's just amazing. Oops, what happened there? It's amazing how, and every year I do it, I have a file, I put SW in the front of the file name, and that means it's standard work. So I can immediately see, hey, I got standard work for that. Sometimes I even forget I had it. And I go through step by step. And believe me, it really, I get better and better every year that I do it, and it just makes my life so much easier. So you can do this for your personal work as well. Okay, so to get started, here's what I suggest. Go create a checklist. You may have an existing checklist, you might want to update it, but basically find some process that you'd like to create a checklist for. And then go ahead and hold a stand-up meeting, you know, where you talk about the checklist. Now keep it very focused. I would say stick to strictly to talking about that checklist, the 15-minute time limit. If you want to talk about other things, that's fine. But if you haven't held these kind of meetings before, I would say beware, because sometimes it turns into a gripe session, and that can be annoying, but that's okay because that's bringing out some issues. So don't be discouraged by that. And that's where you, if you have these issues come up, you say, okay, that'll be an action item. We're going to deal with this, but don't go down a rabbit hole. So try it. Just try a stand-up meeting focused on that checklist. And then for that process you looked at, go ahead and try to break it down. Do the breakdown sheet, get some other people involved if possible. And then just you don't have to go any further. Just reflect on how much you learned by doing this. And I can guarantee you, if you just spend even an hour or two on it, you're going to learn so much about that process. So with that, I just want to let you know, as far as follow-ups, here's my email. I'm going to actually put this in the chat in just a minute, my email. And I do have an executive education course on YouTube. Here's my website where you can go. It's about a 2.5-hour course. It's all free. That follows through a lot of this material, although I'm now making it even more practical in these webinars. This is my book available on Amazon. If you do want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, you will be getting updates of this, of the future, releases of these webinars, as far as other things I do. And I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat again. So if you want to copy that, if you want to be able to subscribe to my channel, I'll be doing that in just a second. And with that, I want to thank you very much and turn it back over to Lewis.